to live the most wonderful experience of your life.
I wanted to make something sacred, free, with new perspective, open the mind. I start the fight to make Dune.
The genesis of the documentary just came from it started with my interest in Alejandro Jodorowsky and his amazing body of work. And then once you're a fan of his films, as I was, then you learn that there was a lost film. Not only is it a film that he tried to make, but then it was made 10 years later almost by somebody else. You can see the film that exists, and then you start to learn what could have been. And you start to add all of those amazing things together. You know, not only Alejandro, of course, but his whole team of Mobius and Chris Voss and Giger, and then you look at the cast, and you see, you know, his own son, Brontes, and you see Orson Welles, you see Salvador Dali, you see Mick Jagger, David Carradine, Udo Kier, and then on top of all that, you add Magma, you add Pink Floyd. It's the craziest story of all time. It needed to be told, really. And I personally, I wanted to learn more about it. And how else do you learn about it except by contacting the man himself and talking to him? People do say that it would have been difficult for him technologically to make the film. But at that same time, I mean, Star Wars they were working on that pretty much simultaneously. Star Wars came out in 1977, so they were working on that in 1976, 1975, and for that film, they were really developing the techniques. And it was the same thing with 2001. You know, when Kubrick made 2001, Douglas Trumbull had to invent those techniques. That's what Dan O'Bannon would have done, figured out a way to make real what was in Alejandro's dreams. But that's also, I think, the process of making a film. I think you have your ideas on paper, but then once you get to on set, things change, and you have to adapt a little bit. But I think the technology, I believe they would have figured it out. In the film, Alejandro says that he wanted the film to be 12 hours or 20 hours. Now, whether he really wanted the film to be that long, or maybe he was just saying that because the studio wanted to give him direction and wanted to say, Alejandro, we need this to be an hour and a half, 2 hours. And he says, no, he doesn't want anybody telling him anything. So you tell me it's going to be 2 hours? No, it's going to be 20 hours. It's going to be as long as I want it to be. So I don't know really how long it would have been. I think it would have been a long movie, but I don't know if it would have been 20 hours. But if so, that'd be pretty amazing.
You need to create another world. The optical world is not the literary auditive world. I need to find the warriors. I need 3,000 drawings, point of view, movement of the camera, dialogue. I use Moebius like a camera. He was very quick. He was superhuman. I went to search Giger. He made the monster of Alien. The castle. Open the mouth, a tongue. Go there, out. The spaceship came in the tongue.
I mean, he's a true artist. That's one of the many reasons that I admire him so much. He only does what he wants to do. He's only made a handful of movies. He doesn't make a movie every year or every 2 years like many directors make. He makes it when it's good for him, you know, when he has something to say. You know, he says that the worst thing in the world is for people to go see a movie, sit down in the seat in the theater, watch it for 2 hours, and leave and be the same person. You know, he wants you to go into the theater, watch the movie, and be changed, you know, to come out as a different person. So I think he feels the only way he can do that is to really, you've got to get behind him and with his ideas and with his dreams. But then on the flip side, you know, he's got, even with Dune, you know, he had his team of spiritual warriors, and he didn't tell them, you know, Chris Voss, you need to draw me exactly this. He let them be free. He let them to create. But if it's going to be some, you know, accountant or something at a movie studio who's telling him it needs to be this, it needs to be that, he's a rebel. He's going to rebel against that and say no way. Alejandro was trying to do was to make something huge, maybe the biggest movie of its time, and it's hard to get people to financially get behind you, at least especially in the United States, I think. So they say nobody in Hollywood loses their job for saying no. You know, they lose their job for saying yes, and the movie is horrible, and then they get fired. So it's easier to say no, and pass it off onto somebody else. So he says that he would do anything to make this film. He would cut off his arms, he would cut off his legs, he would sacrifice his son. He puts his cast and his team through a lot of suffering to get these stories made. I think he still does. I think his last film, The Dance of Reality, which is my personal favorite so far of all of his films, was, I think, torture for a lot of people to work on. And he's finishing up a new film right now, and I can only imagine that it was torturous for people. But that's part of his process. You know, it can't be easy. It's got to be difficult, because it's something that's so personal, I think, to him.
Well, Hollow is a bit like a dictator or a cult leader in assembling his army around him.
Orson Welles, Pink Floyd, Dali, Mick Jagger.
Ce storyboard, il a circulé dans les couloirs d'Hollywood. Je peux pas imaginer sans.
It's a dream. Don't change my dream.
We had access to the artwork, you know, that huge book that they put together, all the storyboards. The first time I got to see the book, of course, the first scene that you see is that first shot. He wants it to be the longest shot in the history of cinema, you know, longer than Orson Welles' opening shot of Touch of Evil. And so once we could see that in the storyboards, and the whole thing is laid out over 3 or 4 pages, we knew that that was the first thing I said, we have to animate that. And then we sort of went through the whole book of art and sort of had to choose the sequences within his film that would give you, in the audience, an idea of what his film might have looked like. But the things that we chose needed to represent something bigger. One of the animated sequences that still affects me when I watch it is the one where Leto gets his arms cut off and his legs cut off and his head cut off. I mean, if you can imagine that would be David Carradine being chopped up into pieces by Orson Welles to the soundtrack of Magma. That's kind of incredible. But on top of that just being so incredible, it also represents what Alejandro was going through. But can you imagine David Carradine being chopped up into pieces by Orson Welles? I mean, come on, I want to see that movie. Come on.
Dune is probably the greatest movie never made. It continues to influence us despite the fact that it doesn't exist. We cannot rent it, we cannot watch it.
Jamais dans l'histoire, un film aura été aussi avancé pour ne pas devenir un film.
I think that not only did Alejandro Jodorowsky's Dune influence other films, but I think going before that, I think the novel of Dune. Would Star Wars be Star Wars without Dune? You know, would Star Wars open up on the desert planet if Dune was not based on a desert planet? There's so many similarities. If you look at Star Wars, look at the way they dress, look at the way they fight. There's so many similarities that George Lucas, of course, was influenced by one of the great science fiction novels, of course. And then on top of that, you add all the work that Alejandro did. And those he took all of his work, they put it into those books. They gave one to Paramount, one to Universal, one to Fox, and they left them there. They never went back to get them. So you know those books must have been passed around. I mean, if someone brings you a book that weighs like 30 kilos, even if you say no to the project, you're going to call your friends and say, check this out. This is something we've never seen before. Look at this crazy stuff in there. I think that they were certainly influenced by things. I think Alejandro influences so many films to today. I mean, I don't know if you saw The Revenant. There's an Alejandro Jodorowsky tribute in The Revenant. There's a scene where somebody's shot and a bird comes flying out of the hole. And that's from The Holy Mountain. Whether it's Dune or The Holy Mountain or El Topo or Santa Sangre or his poetry, his comic books, certainly, I think that they get out into the world and they influence people, which is really the beauty, I think, the beauty of it all. He says he wanted to change the world and he wanted to inspire people. And, you know, I think it was our intention to celebrate the power of cinema and the power of art and the power of inspiring, you know, of inspiration. How do you inspire people? I mean, that's to me what it's really about. I think that people can go see this documentary and they don't have They don't have to know who Alejandro Jodorowsky is. They don't have to know what Dune is. They don't have to be fans of science fiction. It's not really about those things. It's about something more universal. You know, I think anybody can see it and be inspired in their own fields. I think they can take the inspiration from him and from this story and go out and try to change the world, just like he did.
It's awesome.
It's enormous.
Bigger than 2001.
Could be fantastic, no?
You can hear in some films, I'm Dune, I'm Dune, I'm Dune.